Radical Catalyst Club. It's a Radical Catalyst Club. Radcat, Radical Catalyst Club.
Woo! Like it. That's great. Thank you so much, Ruth. That's lovely.
Milagros, how are you doing in our current pandemic? How are you coping, and how are you dealing with all what's going on?
As well as can be expected. I did lose a nephew. One of my nephews passed away last week, and in fact, I just spoke with my niece a few minutes before I got on, and she told me they just got the body because they've been waiting. They're in New York City, so but she said we won't be able to get him cremated till the middle of May because they're so backed up. So there's that, and I'm fine, and those who are here with me we're good. Yeah.
Can you speak to a little bit about there's a lot of talk about a lot of racial issues are coming up in the pandemic that's being exposed because everything's kind of coming out, right? A lot of things are being the light's shining on everything right now because because the systems are flattening and things are not being hidden anymore. Can you speak to about what this has uncovered in race, this whole pandemic?
Yeah, so the way that I see it, this pandemic has really revealed the faults in our country. And, those places where we really need to do some serious work. For instance, children are in school right now. And teachers are reporting that about 50% of their students are actually reporting on the web. We're not necessarily taking into consideration that there are children, particularly poor and children of color, who may not even have a computer. If they have a computer, they may or may not have internet access because their parents may or may not be able to pay it. So those students aren't getting access to the education because they don't have access, period, right? So that's one thing. The school lunch program, I remember, and I wrote an article about this that we're going to put out in a few days. My very best friend, Samantha, she was amazing. She was brilliant. She grew up in Parsons, Tennessee. It was an old black town. And she told me one day, I still get emotional about that, that she loved going to school because it was the only place that she was assured a meal. And during the summer, how she and her siblings would sometimes go hungry because they just didn't have food. And so school was the place where they would be assured a meal. And I thought about that because I remember, it was in the early 90s. I was sitting at a dental office having my teeth cleaned. And this was the first time I had seen this dentist. And he said to me, "Wow, your mom had really good nutrition when she was pregnant with you." And I said, "How did you know that?" He said, "Because of the quality of your teeth." We don't take into consideration how those 9 months before birth, the impact that has on the yet to be born, and those first 6 to 7 years. We live in a country that's super rich. We shouldn't have starving children. We shouldn't have children that have to go to school, not just because they have to go to school, but that's the place that they get a meal. Like, that's insane, right? So that's been, and my friend died in 2005. She died of an aneurysm. And I remember thinking, because, when you're hurt, you look for something or someone to blame, right? So my thought was, if my friend had had good nutrition, maybe she would have been healthier, if she had good nutrition as a child. So a lot of us live with this kind of awareness and knowledge, and a lot of people don't. right? So what this pandemic has done is it's broken all that open. It's revealed how, there are children in our country of all colors and all nationalities who rely on the school program for a meal. Um, our schools now have a breakfast program, and this is how we impact change, right? A lot of people don't realize that the breakfast program in our schools was actually started by the Black Panthers in Oakland, California. They realized that the children, when they were going to school in the morning, they were going to school hungry, and they wouldn't get a meal until lunchtime, and how that was affecting their ability to focus and their ability to learn and so on. So they started making food in the morning and feeding the children before they went to school. That program, it has now been implemented nationwide. We now have a breakfast and a lunch program for children. So that's the kind of change that we can make as groups when we get together. And we're going to talk a little bit about change and hope and all of those things. But anyway, so that's a long answer to your short question.
Can you speak to a little bit about things like why maybe the word is that the African American community in general is more susceptible to COVID-19, and maybe talk briefly a little bit about like why that may be the case.
Yeah, so I always say that those who are closest to the precipice are the first to fall into the abyss. So you have people who are already susceptible because they live in environments, environmentally racist environments that are already poisoned. So there's hazardous waste. There are a lot of different things that people are exposed to on a regular basis because communities of color and poor communities are dumping grounds for a lot of corporations. And ever since the 70s and 80s, Black communities and communities of color and indigenous communities have been talking about that. You don't always see that on the regular 5 o'clock news, but people are constantly working on environmental issues in these communities. So there's that. Then you also have the intergenerational and historical trauma that has never been healed. Just because you set somebody free doesn't mean that now they're over it or get over it. The truth is that we now know through research that trauma gets passed on. And it looks like trauma gets passed on through epigenetics for 6 generations, and that doesn't include the original generation that was traumatized. So we're talking 7 generations hence, okay? And so we have trauma that gets passed down from one generation to the other that has never been healed. Then you have people who are living with micro and macro aggressions on a daily basis, whether it's driving while Black, walking while Black, things that people say at work. So it's this constant state of excessive stress that we don't address in healthcare when it comes to dealing with racism. To top all of that off, you have a mostly white medical community that doesn't really understand some of the communities that they're serving when they're serving people of color. There are things in communities of color that have been, again, passed down from generation to generation. And now I'm talking about stories, right? And not just stories, but things that have happened to people. How the medical community has abused and used people of color for experimentation and for vaccines and for all kinds of things. And so the community itself has an internalized fear of that system, okay, because of the abuses that have happened in the past. So you begin to add all of these pieces together, okay, and you have people who, because again of the conditions of life, and I'm not even touching upon food deserts where people don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables because of the way that the supermarkets are set up and where the supermarkets are. access to transportation, where people don't always have the transportation to get to those supermarkets that are outside of the areas where they live. So now we're talking nutrition, right? Not to mention, people get paid less for their work. And so therefore, even if they do have access to the supermarket, they have to be very cautious about how they spend the money so they could feed the entire family. So it's like one thing after another, and you keep adding those things and you keep adding those things. And so people have higher incidence of lung scarring, breast cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure, all of these things that affect the community, along with the intergenerational historical trauma. You know what I mean? Like, it just adds up. And so you have a community that's been made vulnerable by the circumstances that they live in and they live under. So let me backtrack and break that down, okay? So racism has 4 stages of development. There is structural or institutional, there is systemic, there is internalized, and interpersonal, okay? So I'm gonna break those down so that and you'll be able to see how they all fit into what we're talking about with what's happening with people right now. How we create policies and laws and all those kinds of things are, or rather how we get people to do certain things, okay, is we turn it into law. So, excuse me, it becomes structural or institutionalized. We create institutions that then have systems that make sure that people follow what's been institutionalized, okay? And as you're living under those systems, you absorb those systems, and that becomes internalized. And then we interact with each other based on what we have internalized. I always tell people racism is not the fault of anybody around today, but it is our collective responsibility to understand it, to understand how it's structured so that we can deconstruct it, okay? So, and I'll give you, this is a perfect example. I'm not even gonna give you an example from race right now, because I want you to see how it's here and now and we are experiencing it, right? Through COVID-19. So we have now institutionalized, right? We've made policies and it's the law that, let's say you have to wear a mask when you go in the supermarket, okay? So the people, and we have systems, right, to make sure that that happens, right? So it depends on where you live in the country. In some places, if you go outside, you break some of these laws, right? So what's been institutionalized, you could get a fine of $1,000, or in some places people are being arrested and blah, 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 right? So you have you've institutionalized something that people have to follow, and you've set up systems to make sure that people follow what's been institutionalized. As a result, people absorb those systems and institutions, okay? And then they start to interact with each other out of that. For instance, if you, depending on where you live in the country, if you walk into a supermarket right now without wearing a mask, people will look at you like you have 3 heads. So that's the beginning. If this goes on for a long time, somebody going, and people are sort of locked down, right? Everybody's in place, which already can be very stressful for a lot of people. So you can have people going into a supermarket who see somebody who's not wearing a mask, and what they've internalized from the system is anyone who's not wearing a mask is dangerous to you. They could be carrying something that could kill you, okay? And so as a result, people could actually get violent with that person and justify it in their minds as almost like self-defense. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because in their minds, it's like because you weren't wearing a mask, you were putting me in danger. So at that point, the system doesn't have to check you anymore. We become a self-regulating system and we start checking each other and making sure that people follow. And if they don't follow, we actually can report them. There are places in California where they have a form, you can look it up on the web, where you can report businesses and people who are not following the law, what's been institutionalized. Racism works exactly the same way. Racism is institutional. We have systems that check to make sure that what's been institutionalized has been followed. Because we live in a racialized system, we have absorbed the system, and then we interact with each other out of it, and we don't even realize that we're doing it because now it's become the new normal. Isn't that what we're saying about some of the COVID-19 stuff? Is the new normal, and once the whatever the dysfunction is that has been normalized, then that becomes how we interact with each other. Does that make sense? So we have hundreds of years, okay, over 500 years of institutionalized racism with systems that have been put in place to follow it. People have absorbed those systems and they interact with each other based on what's been absorbed.
So given this, given the sort of a reset of the institutions and systems today, right now, like a lot of them are pretty much shut down and people are essentially fending for themselves through their homes and interacting, kind of creating this new sort of digital society that in some ways is going to be a framework for what happens when we do get to, interact outside of our homes. But, a lot of people are looking at this as a really great opportunity to actually kind of reset how we self-organize and create new systems. And I know if you shared the idea of like one human race being sort of the ideal system that we could get to in one generation, and people thought you can't do that, it's crazy. Like now in this time of age, it's like, anything's possible in this time.
Yeah.
Would you like sort of frame like, how you see this as an opportunity?
Yeah, so for me, this is the glimmer of hope in all of this is how quickly we can change everything. Look how quickly, within a matter of weeks, we have changed the way that we have changed structures, systems, and as a result, we've absorbed a new system, and now we're interacting with each other out of what we've absorbed. Does that make sense? So we can do that with other things, right? So for me, the glimmer of hope is not only can we change, but look how quickly we can change. If we all decide that we no longer want to have children having to depend on going to school to get a meal in the middle of the summer. You know what I mean? Like, what is that? Like, we can see, how can we get computers and make sure that everybody has access to technology, because we need that right now, and so who's going to do what, right? Like, so we can, just like the Black Panthers organize themselves around kids shouldn't be going to school without breakfast, right? We can organize ourselves with things that are meaningful to us, with things that create the kind of human environment, the kind of, like, I believe, and I know for some people that seems naive, but I believe that most human beings want to live in a healthy, happy, joyous, fulfilling environment. And they want other people to do the same, because it's like Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Because as long as people don't feel safe, they're going to do something that could harm you. And it's not because necessarily they're trying to harm you, but they're just trying to keep themselves safe. Does that make sense? So we have this what I call sacred time, right? Where we can start to look at where's our heart, right? And what can I do? You know how, well, you've been to my seminar, how we do visioning. It's like, it isn't just let's sit around and dream it. It's like, what are you going to do to make sure that that happens, right? Whatever your vision, whatever your dream is, what, you know, I call it inspired action, right? So everybody that leaves my seminar has to leave with some kind of inspired action. Like how can you make a difference right where you are, whether it's with your family, whether it's at your job, like everyone can do something to make a difference. So we have this incredible, like we, you know, I mean, I've been on the planet for 65 years, okay? And I have never seen everything stop, okay? I mean, I was in New York during the riots. I was in New York when we lost power a couple of different times, when things just kind of stop, but never for this long. And so there's the horror of we're losing human beings on a daily basis. There's the horror that people are getting sick right now. And then there's this glimmer of hope that says those of us who are not sick right now, who are healthy, who can make a difference, where can we make a difference? What kind of difference can we make? What can we commit to that when we re-engage with the world, remember the stage of re-engagement, right? When we go through the healing process, when we re-engage with the world, how will we re-engage? Will we re-engage from power or powerlessness? And we can choose that now, so that when we re-engage from a place that makes us all feel like we got this. We got this. So, I mean, human beings are incredibly powerful. And look what we can do when we work together. We've changed an entire world in a matter of weeks. You know, what can't we do?
Can you
All
think of
things are possible.
examples? Are there any examples, or, two-part questions? One is, can you think of examples of like where you've seen this happen? And then the second part to this is, what can, people in this group and the general, say the burner community is very, actually, I'm going to ask this first question first. So have you seen examples of this happening as far as like a one human race sort of solidarity coming that you've seen so far?
No. No, I mean, there've been pockets of people who have tried to work together. But here's the thing. And I'm involved in a project right now where I'm really seeing how deeply internalized and unconscious people can be around the issue of race. And so the part of me that's been working on this for 30 years gets frustrated, right? And the part of me that understands realizes, there are layers of understanding that people haven't reached, not their fault, because we don't teach it in school. We don't, there's a lot of missing context, right? And as a result, people work on this stuff, but they go back to sleep very quickly because they feel like they're not making the kind of progress that they could be making. And a lot of that has to do with the stuff is sort of hanging in midair without context. The context helps you to ground it and to understand it. That's why I talk to people about institutional, systemic, internalized, because people want to resolve racism from the interpersonal perspective, and you got to start somewhere, right? But the truth is, the only reason we have the interpersonal issue is because we've internalized it. The only reason we've internalized it is because it's been in the system and it's been institutionalized. If we didn't have those two, we wouldn't. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's all connected, right? So there are pockets of people that come together that want to do these kinds of things, but it doesn't seem to stick. And I think a lot of that has to do with not having context, because there's no grounding rod for it.
By the way, does anyone have any questions? You could raise your hand. Yeah. Okay, Krista has a question. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm really grateful to be listening to this discussion, and thank you. Thanks for organizing it. Thanks for being here. I have so many questions. I don't know where to start, but I'm in an interesting position with I'm married to a man from North Africa, and my daughter identifies as a woman of color. And so we have really rich conversations about whiteness and about social justice. And I guess one question that comes to mind for me is when I think of justice, like I can't think of any justice that could balance out our horrific past. And so I feel like in some ways what we need is mercy. And I wonder what you think about that. And I guess that's a white perspective, for sure. But I also wonder, it also comes from my spiritual orientation. And I wonder if you could say something about the role of spirituality in racial healing, and if you think it's a necessary component of it.
Yeah. So for me, this is mind, body, spirit, and emotions. And I always tell people I wouldn't be able to do this work in the way that I do it if I didn't have, I had a spiritual awakening around it. And not just one, actually. I had a lot of them. and a lot of them was walking through the shadow, my own shadow around it, what I had absorbed as shadow from, from our collective, right? So there's a huge opening for people to do spiritual work around this. In fact, my work is based on the Course in Miracles. I translated the Course in Miracles into corporate language because I've been doing this since the late 80s. And I knew that that if I went in there to speak that language, they didn't want to hear it. And we also have separation of church and state, right? So I had to translate the Course in Miracles. That's why the work that I do is so powerful, because it's grounded in spirituality. So there's that. And we don't always recognize people as being mind, body, spirit, and emotions. In fact, we recognize mind, body. We don't always recognize the emotional and spiritual component to human beings, and the importance of cracking that open and unpacking that to give people access to the fullness of their power and to really help to stabilize them. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that I had to awaken to was the way in which racism impacts whites. And this was early on. This was in the 90s. For me, that was early on. And I just wasn't buying it. You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean? Like, these people have everything. They have access to everything, right? What the piece that I didn't get was how whites are also oppressed. And I literally had to be shown that spiritually. And it was in meditation that I came to understand that the reason whites are not aware of their oppression is because it's hidden behind privilege. So they can't see it. And it's purposely hidden behind privilege so they don't see it. Because when people start to open up and to see that, nobody likes to be oppressed. I don't care who you are, right? And so that could, in a way, could cause a revolution, because once people start to own that and see that their power is hidden behind that, and we call it we talk about our structure as a parental structure, right? So we talk about it from the perspective of we live in a patriarchy. Well, patriarchy need children. They don't need other parents. Okay, they need for you to be a child. So what happens in patriarchy is that the people who live under patriarchy become infantilized. And the way in which whites are infantilized is through the offering of toys, which is privilege. So and that, and that had to be unpacked for me spiritually, because I was like, I was completely resistant to it. But once I came to understand it, what it did was it took me to a deeper level of compassion and a deeper level of connection, because we are all in this together. It just takes different forms. And then
May I ask
the question? Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
No. I
I just,
had another question, and that's what I was asking. What was your other question? Or if someone else had a question.
no, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, she was, Milagros was asking if you had another question, yeah.
Um, no, I think you've answered it. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Does anyone else have any questions? So regarding when you said, like, is there an example, and you said you can't really think of an example. I want to posit
hold on a second, Neil. I couldn't think of an example at a global level. I said that there are people that have come together to try to do this.
Yeah. So can you like mention it? Can you illustrate a local example that showed?
Oh, well, I was involved with some spiritual groups in Massachusetts when I lived up there, and we've sort of disbanded at this point. But they really struggled with the race thing themselves. It was tough. And they're all my friends, so they know it. It's like, but we were a collective group of people who were doing some very, very deep, very beautiful spiritual work. And they just, of course, this was in the 90s, they just really weren't getting.
Well, I'm referring to like the previous question when I asked you, like, can you think of the one human race sort of reset that we get to actually do something and make change in a generation? And I was asking if you could think of an example of like something manifesting.
Well, you know what? Yeah. So when I was a young person, remember, I'm like close to 100 years old, right? So when I was a young person, there was this whole thing around blonde women not being very bright. And there were commercials about it. People would laugh about it. It was jokes. It was in the movies. It was horrible. Okay. Fast forward, we have movies like, oh my gosh, I see the people in this movie, but movies that showed blonde women as intelligent, as capable, as productive members of society.
Thinking of Legally Blonde?
Legally Blonde, but there were a lot of other movies that were around that same genre. There were also the commercials on television changed. I remember when I was growing up, one of the famous commercials was Blondes Have More Fun. And it was around getting women to dye their hair blonde, kind of a thing, So we no longer have that stigma the way that it was when I was a kid, okay? Where blonde women were just not seen as smart. We were able to change that in one generation, because I was around when it wasn't like that, and I'm still here, okay? So I'm saying that to say that when we want to make change, and we come to collective agreement, we can do it, and we can do it very quickly. The reason that we've been able to make the changes that we've been able to make around COVID-19 is because there's a unity of message, right? And people are on board because obviously, it's their health and their life, right? So people are on board. And so we have the media, we have the internet. We like everything is putting down one specific message. As a result, people are acting out of, because remember, it's institutional, right? So then people start acting out of what is being structured. Okay, and so we've been able to make fast change, faster within weeks. With some of this stuff, days. Okay, so for me, that just tells me, oh my God, like I remember being in my room, waking up in the middle of the night and going, oh my God, look at all this change, how fast we're doing it. We can do this with other stuff. This is not the only thing. We can make big, fast changes around. We just need to act as if we are, which we are, one human family, and we want all the cousins to eat. We want all the cousins to have a place to live that's decent. We want all the cousins to get paid properly for their work. You know what I mean? Like, if we collectively say, this is what we want, and then we work toward it, and then we make the media tell everybody else, you know what I'm saying? And we put it on the internet. We do exactly what they do. Those guys are real good at putting stuff out, okay? They get together, they get it structured, they get it done. We need to do the same thing. If we want to, you know, because we have the power to change things, but we have to work on it. And we have to come together and we have to say, okay, we know so-and-so at such and such a station, we need to work with them to make them see the importance of this and blah. You know, like that's what they did. And look at what's happened. So we have the power, and now we're seeing it. So it isn't like we have to imagine, we have to hope, we have to dream, we have to go into manifestation and visualize. We don't have to do any of that. We got it right in front of our noses, okay? So we know how to do it. I'm so excited. Seriously, I really am, because I feel that if we get together, wow, like, oh my God, the sky's the limit. We can change this world and make it into the kind of world that a lot of us dreamed of when we were children, of saying, I want to grow up to change the world, right? The only reason a kid says that is because they feel like there's something wrong out there, okay? So, you know, so we have the ability to bring our childhood dreams to manifestation very quickly. I'm so excited. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You had another question.
Oh, yeah. It's related to this, and this is kind of like a project that might be a potential project like this that I want to get your advice on, that you know a little bit about actually. So Burning Man's 80,000 people. It was canceled this year. It's Burning Man's mostly white, as you consulted on in the video. Burning Man, a white people thing. There was a group, it was an initiative to actually create this global multicultural person of color neighborhood to actually kind of demonstrate in this city that was mostly white, like what a multicultural neighborhood, like a Wakanda, but like a multicultural one, right? So that was the idea to like make that happen. And so that's basically, and there wasn't quite going to be organized enough in time to happen at this next Burning Man in August. But now that it's been canceled, they're talking about, and nobody knows what the vision is, to be a virtual Burning Man. So there's about maybe 60 to 80 people of color we're talking about this initiative of the physical neighborhood, but now that's been wiped off, and now it's going to be like, we're going to create this virtual neighborhood. We don't, a virtual city, we have no idea what it's going to be like yet. Mm-hmm. But like, what kind of advice would you give the 60 to 80 people to say, if you're given a blank slate and you now have a chance to create this multicultural, global, one human race neighborhood, and you kind of like given a blank slate to do that, and then whatever you come up with, the virtual Burning Man folks will actually look at that and say, how can we accommodate that into our model, because we don't want to tell anyone how to do things. What kind of advice would you give to this group?
So so I'm somebody who believes in the research around intergenerational historical stuff, not just around race, because every culture has internalized or has had to live through some huge traumatic thing, okay? And understanding that, well, let me backtrack. Life is a continuum. It's great to create something today, but if you create something today that is detached from who we've been, you're going to end up right back in the same place. So for me, if I were doing something like that, the first thing I would do would be to encourage people to look at the historical context that's led them to be who they are. Really get in touch with their ancestry kind of thing, and understand what happened to them, so that when you create, you really are creating something new and not just a repetition of the history. Because one of the things that is a little scary for me about what's happening right now with COVID-19 is some of the things that are happening, and this may sound very controversial, but it's just how I see it from my understanding of history, remind me a lot of how people were conditioned before World War II in Germany. It's very, for me, I have friends who are Jewish who are very triggered right now. And I was talking to one particular friend who, she was just triggered, but she wasn't linking it to the history. Once we talked a little bit about this looks like this and this looks like that, she was able to have a sense of peace because she understood why she was getting triggered, right? So sometimes when people come together, they get triggered and they don't know how or why they're being triggered, and it has to do with unresolved issues from the past. So I would say as you're starting to create something new, create it with the awareness that we are inextricably linked to our past. And if we don't have some sense of that past, you don't have to know every detail, right? But if we don't have some sense of that past, we're likely to recreate it, thinking that we're doing something new when all we're doing is leading ourselves right back down the old path. And then when we get to a crossroads in the path, we're going, how did this happen? And it's like, well, there was no awareness that we were just part of the continuum. It's great to be creative. I'm an artist, so, it's like we live on that's our pump, right? We thrive on that. But when we're looking to transform, if we don't acknowledge the shadow of our past, the shadow owns us. And it will lead us down whatever path the shadow wants, and we won't even realize that we're doing that. And then one day the shadow just engulfs us and we're like, what just happened here? But it's like, well, when we own the shadow, when we acknowledge the shadow, we become stronger than the shadow. And so the shadow doesn't have us anymore. We have it. And then we can choose what we do with it. So my advice would be, so many people say, that's in the past. Why do we have to talk about that? Well, a lot of people don't really understand the past. And without that understanding, we keep tripping over each other when we really are here to love each other and to be compassionate and forgiving and to create a world of joy and peace and beauty. And we can do that. But we need to understand that to create something new, we need to understand what we created in the past that was great and what we created in the past that wasn't so. Yeah.
Thank you, Milagros. That's I want to end on that. There's one other question I have to ask you, sir, if you can provide a brief answer, just because it's Earth Day, and then Ruth's going to provide us improv. He completely made it up song to capture everything that we've experienced in this interview. But if you go ask the last one, because it's Earth Day, could you sort of provide a little, there's a little bit of a stigma that people of color maybe don't care about things like Earth Day as much for various reasons, or climate change. And could you provide a little bit of maybe just a little briefing on what your take on that?
Sure. Yeah. Not true. That's the first thing, right? No, actually, a lot of the principles that are used today in environmental justice work were created by environmentalists of color back in the 1980s and the 1990s. And in fact, in 1991, there was a summit that was held in Washington, D.C. that was attended by Native Americans, African Americans, Asians, Pacific Islanders, just people of color from different parts of the world. And they came up with 17 principles that are still used today in environmental justice work. Back in the 1980s, I want to say like 1987, there were protests from African Americans in communities that were being bombarded by hazardous waste. Indigenous communities, Native Americans have always protested around issues of the environmental justice issues. The dumping grounds for most, actually, I sent you something that has the 17 principles, but I also sent you some links that you can share with anyone who's on the call. That there's actually a map that was developed in 1987 that showed basically environmental injustice around this country, and it was all communities of color. Now you have to remember that, first of all, the reason it seems like people of color aren't involved is because when they do their environmental protests, they don't always get on the news. That's number one. Number two is sometimes people living in these communities, because they're poor communities, and they're usually targeted because a lot of them don't have access to the justice system. So it's not like the community can hire lawyers and help and work with them. It's usually volunteer lawyers that will come in and work with them pro bono and that kind of thing. So these things are dumped in their environment because they're usually poor. Some of them hold several different jobs to be able to make ends meet. So they don't have time to go out and protest. So, so there are a lot of, different things, but the African-American community, the indigenous communities, the Latinx community, all these communities have been talking about environmental issues before it was sexy, before it was popular. Dr. Martin Luther King talked about environmental issues way back when. So that's a perception, that's not a reality. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I posted the link to that, the 17 principles in the chat. So we're gonna have Root share his song, and then as soon as his song, we'll just do just a 5-second goodbye to everybody, and then we'll close out the meeting. So thank you so much, Milagros.
Thank you, Neil, for inviting me to do this, and thank all of you for staying here and sharing your time with us. I really appreciate it, and thank you for the questions.
Okay. All right,
Yeah, definitely. I would like to dedicate this song to your nephew.
Oh, thank you.
Family. Can you guys hear this? Like the drums and stuff? Okay, here we go. Oh, I got to put on the magic glasses.
Love those.
This is sacred time where we can define every single leaf on every branch of the family tree is divine. Have you ever been hungry? Have you ever seen anybody hungry? Do you know what it feels like? I see a future. Every smiling face, one human race. Oppression imprinted, all on the privilege well hidden. Don't even know it, but your face shows it when you see one another. Our sisters and brothers. Oh, the veil isn't lifted. Now you are gifted. Oh, I see a smile on every single face. In the future, one human race will take the place of all this institutional trauma through ancestry. All the future we can see 7 generations from now. Can you see 7 generations from now? Every single leaf on every single each and every branch of the family tree divine. In the sacred time, smile on every face. One human race. One human